My story is I went to school and it didn't work. I had something that most people would call a learning disability, and it got in the way of school functioning for me. And more often than not, I got dumb tracked. And basically, that complete failure of school to reach me accidentally worked like some kind of unschooling, I would say. And so there are maybe many paths, I don't know, but I'd be curious for people who have traveled some road to the land of high quality, independent thought. What can they expect the experience to be like when they arrive there?
The experience of high quality independent thought.
Yes, if you imagine that, well, it would be lovely to think independently and to do so well, and the world is going to be a paradise if you start doing that, because, of course, that's a very desirable thing to do and people will appreciate it. You're going to be surprised. That's not necessarily what happens when you arrive there, and certain experiences show up all over the place. And without telling you what my experiences might have been, I'm curious as to what you might have encountered and whether or not those things will be similar.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I think most people will experience a higher degree of uncertainty than people that are part of any camp that has figured most things out and they can cognitively offload to whoever the authorities or the general group consensus is. Um, and certainty is certainly comfortable in a particular way. And if you're really thinking well about what is my basis for what I believe, what is the epistemic grounding, what's the basis of my confidence margin, and you really think about your confidence basis clearly, as you try to find more information to deepen the topic, the known unknowns expand faster, like at least at a second order to what the known knowns do. And so you keep being aware of more stuff that you don't know that you know is relevant and pertains to the situation. So there's a complexification of thought. There's an increase in uncertainty. Hopefully, there's an emotional development and kind of a psychological development where there's an increased comfort with uncertainty so that you can actually be honest and not defect on your own sense making into premature certainty that creates confirmation bias. And there's also and I think that's why one of the reasons you use the term independent, there is a certain aloneness of not having a whole camp of people that think very similarly. I don't find that to be a painful thing, but it's a thing.
No, it's actually, in its own way, it's freeing because the fact is, if you follow logic to natural conclusions, you'll end up saying a lot of things that are alarming or discordant with the conventional wisdom. And the world neatly divides into people who will be so enraged or thrown by what you're saying that they disappear, or maybe they become antagonists at a distance, and the people who have a similar experience and therefore aren't thrown by the fact that you're saying things that are out of phase. And so editing the world down to those who are comfortable with what they don't know, who are interested in following things where they lead, irrespective of who that elevates and who it hobbles. Those people are interesting people to hang out with. And so, yes, the alienation may be a blessing in disguise in some ways.
There's two other thoughts that came up as you were just talking. One is I wouldn't call myself an independent thinker. I'm being particular about the semantic of the word independent. I wouldn't call anyone an independent thinker because I think in words invented by other people. I think in concepts invented and discovered by other people. I don't necessarily have a specific school of orthodoxy from which I take an entire worldview, but almost every idea that I believe in, I did not discover. And so I think that's a very important concept because I think the ideas we're going to discuss today regarding democracy and open society have to do with the relationship between an individual and a collective. And I think the idea of an individual is fundamentally a misnomer. Without everybody else, I wouldn't be who I am. And I wouldn't think the way I think. I wouldn't think in the language I do. I wouldn't have access to, the knowledge that came from the Hubble telescope and the Large Hadron Collider and so many things like that. So I can say that there is a certain ultimate authority that of what I choose to feel that I believe in and trust that has an internal locus of control. But the information coming from without and my own internal processing of it are part of the same system.
So this is a perfect example of what I was suggesting up front, where two people who do whatever we're going to call this will have their own separate glossaries. So if I can translate what you've just said, I, Daniel Schmachtenberger, am not an independent thinker because such a thing is inconceivable in human form, right? And I totally agree with that. The fact is, not only are you interwoven with all sorts of humans who are responsible for conveying to you in one way or another conclusions that you couldn't possibly check. These are thoughts that would be familiar to Descartes, for example. But you are also building from the entirety of cumulative human culture, right? All of the tools with which you can think are, almost all of them are too ancient to even know where their rudiments originated. So anyway, I don't disagree with any of that. So to me, I would say there is such a thing as an independent thinker. And in your schema, it has to do with whether or not they are thinking a la carte. That is to say, using that set of tools that is most effective, irrespective of the fact that those tools don't all come from one tradition. And you would say there is no independent thought because a la carte is the most you can do, or something like that.
I might say that I like a term like interdependent better because it doesn't mean that there isn't an individual involved, but it means that the individual without everyone else is also not a thing. And so the recognition that sovereignty and individuality is a thing, and it is conditioned by, affected by, and affecting other groups of people are both necessary in the Hegelian synthesis to understand what is the nature of a human. Are they fundamentally individual and then groups emerge? Are they fundamentally tribal and they're formed by the tribe? And it's very much both in a kind of recursive process between them.
100%. In fact, I once wrote something I called the Declaration of Interdependence. It was a sort of proto-Game B attempt to define what the rules of a functional society would be like. And I also frequently say that the individual is more an illusion than it is real. And what I describe is that an individual is a level of understanding that evolution has focused us on because historically it has been sort of the limit of that where we might have some useful control. Right? Evolution might ultimately care about whether or not you are successful, your genes are still around 100 generations from now, but your focus on 100 generations from now is unlikely to have any useful impact whatsoever, whereas your focus on your life and your children is likely to be useful. So we have been delivered a kind of temporal myopia in order to keep us focused on that which could be productive for an ancestor. But of course, we are now living in an era in which we can have dramatic impacts on the distant future. In fact, you and I are both quite focused on the strong possibility that our foolishness in the present will result in the end of our lineage, and that that is something that evolution, were it capable of upgrading, would certainly have us concerned about, because the hazard is very real and our tendency not to think about it is a big part of the danger.
I think temporal myopia and the collective action, collective coordination problem is a good way to describe all of the problems we face, or one of the generator functions of all the problems we face. That you have a bunch of game theoretic situations where each agent within their own agency pursuing the choice that makes most rational sense to them pursues local optimums where the collective body of that drives global minimums. But if anyone tries to orient towards the longer term global maximum, they just lose in the short term. That's an arms race. That's a tragedy of the commons. And so, how do we reorient the game theory outside of those multipolar traps? I would say is one of our underlying questions, that when the biggest harm we could cause was mediated by stone tools or bronze tools or iron tools or even industrial tools, we didn't have to cause it immediately because the extent of harm was limited in scope. When it is mediated by fully globalized exponential tech running up against planetary boundaries with many different kinds of catastrophe weapons held by many different agents, we actually have to solve the problem.
Yeah, I of course agree completely with this as well, that effectively maybe it really is every single important problem is a collective action problem of one kind or another. We've got races to the bottom, we've got tragedies of the commons, we've got these things intermingled. But once you start to see that, on the one hand, it is you could take from it a kind of reason for despair because these are not easy problems to solve. On the other hand, the discovery that effectively it's not 1,000 distinct problems, it's 1,000 variations on one theme, and that theme is solvable. In fact, we have, for example, Eleanor Ostrom's work, which points to the fact that evolution itself has solved these problems many times. That is hopeful. So I don't know where you are in terms of how hopeful you find yourself about humanity's future, but I'm quite certain that you and I will align on the idea that, yes, if we could focus on the problem as it was, it's more tractable than many people think it is.